Great. Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Andy for stepping into this extra IIIF and AV presentation. Andy works for the British Library, and the British Library was one of the main funders really for the IIIF AV work, and they funded a lot of the meetings that we had earlier on to discuss how we'd fit AV into IIIF. So Andy's going to give a presentation on some of the things that are possible in IIIF currently. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks. So I'll attempt to share this correctly. How's that?
Looks good.
Great. Right, so as Glenn said, I'm Andy Irving from the British Library, and this is kind of a presentation that we gave last year at the IIIF conference in Göttingen, and things have moved on slightly since then, but I think this is still a pretty good overview of kind of where we are and what the state of the art is. And so hopefully my slides should change. There we go. So why IIIF AV? And one of the big motivations for us was that we were very excited by what things we can do within IIIF already with images, the things that hopefully you'll have seen over the last few days from the presentations and workshops. And the ability for us to kind of bring images together from different locations to be able to describe complex objects in an interoperable way, and what we'd really like to see is the ability to use IIIF to present time-based media consistently with image-based content, which we already have, benefit at the same time from being able to link to it, being able to kind of associate metadata with it, to be able to search across the content and to be able to use the access control mechanisms which are already available through IIIF. And so at the moment, for all that text content that we have, we can just annotate it onto this idea of a canvas, which is just the abstract space that's described in the presentation API. And we can add images to that can just take up the whole canvas, or we can target individual regions of a canvas through spatial annotation. And so here we can annotate text over the top of an image. But there's an awful lot of things that we'd like to be able to do. So after the IIIF working group meeting in Ghent in 2015, and then the New York City conference in 2016, we held a workshop over a few days at the British Library with a very large group of people from throughout the community and people from outside as well. And the goal was to try and capture all the various different use cases that we might have in this space. So complex objects like the Beatles' White Album there, or oral history recordings, or old carriers with like really complicated means of structuring things together. All things that we thought might be kind of useful in the kind of IIIF, or as a means of developing ways we could use IIIF to help kind of display them. And these are just some of the kind of mad things that we have available at the British Library. But it goes on, of course. So I mean, there's other things just outside of sound. If you're familiar with this very famous film about Napoleon, it's usually accompanied by a score or a live orchestral score. So one of those examples of perhaps we could bring together the actual film stock of this and a performance by an orchestra as a means of kind of preserving this giving this presentation. So lots of different ways in which we could then combine objects together and assemble time-based media and present it in the same way we do with image stuff. And so in IIIF version presentation API version 2, you could do that today. You can annotate anything you like onto a canvas. But you can only really do the very simplest thing, which is I would like to play an entire video, more or less. And it's not interoperable in the sense that it's not really been anybody's main focus. So the universal viewer, which you'll have seen already, can play content in that way, but it's pretty much the only one. So without being able to kind of target in the same way that we target, say, individual images in the presentation API, it's not a particularly helpful addition to the standards. So one of the big changes in presentation API 3 was that we can now kind of target a canvas duration. And so they don't all have to have these. This is completely optional. and you can still have width and height for images, or you can use duration for audio only, or you can use a combination of the two if you have video. And that is basically the big change, which allows us to meet the simplest cases, which is I'd like to play all of this video or I'd like to play all of this audio file. And yet it's just as simple as I would like to paint this whole image onto a canvas. So that example that we saw at the beginning. But at the same time, it then gives us the ability to kind of expand that kind of ability to reference things in space and time that we've already had, certainly in space for image-based content, but bring that into audio and video as well. So what that means is that we can link any web content to a spatial extent of a canvas, which is kind of exciting when you're thinking in terms of being able to annotate at particular points or for regions of time. And so here is an example, which hopefully will play. Yes. So this is one annotation with an audio body.
We can't hear anything, Andy, if you're helping us. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, then you'll just have to imagine that there's audio coming out of that. Very exciting.
If you want to, you can reshare your screen, and there's a checkbox at the bottom that says share computer audio.
Let's see what we can do there. Meeting controls. They're kind of hidden by my thing. We're probably not going to get too excited about. It's somebody speaking in Japanese, and I guess the presentation will be available afterwards for you to really enjoy it. But the gist is here that we've got several annotations with textual bodies in a choice of language that are allowing us then to kind of target individual regions. And in this example, so this is then showing you the manifest file. And you can see here we've got this MP3 that's targeted to that particular canvas. And you can see here we've got annotations which are available here and that are targeting temporal regions of that canvas. And so it looks a little bit different to the presentation API 2 examples that you'll probably have already have seen, but the concept is still exactly the same, that we can use those fragment identifiers to be able to target particular time ranges. One of the other benefits, of course, is that we've got this idea of a canvas clock. So by having things targeted at different times, you can then synchronize different things to appear at different times. So here we've got two videos that are synchronized, one to appear after the other. And here is like a more complex example of that in use. So here we have audio and video and text and images all targeting different temporal regions of that same canvas. And you can see at the bottom of that, there's this kind of waterfall display of those regions of time to show when they're going to kind of show up. And in fact, you can even use that to kind of navigate around this demo. Of course, with the kind of scrub bar controls that you're familiar with. So that kind of gives you the ability to kind of recreate PowerPoint almost in Iiif if that's your thing. But by expanding the presentation API to include temporal aspects, it means that we can then use those other aspects of the presentation API that are so helpful for images, so things like ranges in particular. And this is a real-world modeling problem from the British Library. So here we've got some archival tape, which contains just over 2 hours of radio broadcast. And each side of the tape is about an hour, and it has structure. So there's broadcast programs which are kind of indicated here. So there's this loose ends program, which is in blue, which contains 2 performances of 2 songs. And then there's some news, and there's some other programs which then go from the end of one side of a tape to the beginning of another. And so on. And these are recorded over a period of time and aren't necessarily all related. And there's even a hierarchy here because, of course, those 2 song performances belong to that loose ends performance. So exactly like we can with the presentation API for images, we can use this to kind of describe complex hierarchical relationships. So the same way with a book, we might describe chapters and use that to group images together, or say newspapers where you might want to group into articles that make up an issue and so on. Here you can do exactly the same thing but with audio and video. Of course, it's slightly more complicated for audio and video because then you need to work out how you could possibly display this in an interface and how that structure could possibly be kind of represented. But thankfully, we've got kind of existing work in the Iiif space to base that upon. And you can see on the right-hand side there, this is how Universal Viewer would render that particular hierarchy. And I'm guessing Mirador would do that now too. So here is an example of exactly that. So here we've gone straight into that to listen to Saturday Review, I think it is. And you can see that that particular region of time is going to be 44 minutes long. But if we view that kind of in the full Universal Viewer, you can see where that situates in context. And you can see in the scrub bar there, that particular region is highlighted. And you can see where it sits in context. The total duration of the thing then is shown as the 2 hours and 4 minutes rather than just the 44 minutes that we were viewing before. And then you can navigate around using the range structures exactly the same way as you would as though they were images. And yeah, you can see that that is kind of reflected throughout. And in this particular example, we've got kind of, for some visual interest, we have the waveform rendered in the background there, because this canvas in particular doesn't have a width and height dimension. Don't play that again. There we go. But obviously this also works for a video as well. So here's an example from Indiana University. So this canvas has a width and a height and a duration. And again, you can use the ranges to navigate around. And here's that exact same canvas, that manifest being played in another viewing application, this one from Kanzaki Masahide. And this one renders the subtitles, which are available as well as associated content. But of course, this also applies to textual content on a canvas, I should say, sorry. So because the canvas is now just an extent of time with spatial dimensions, we can target any particular region, as we've seen. And so you can have hundreds of small text annotations that target the time to provide like a transcript. So here, for example, is an example from the German Parliament. So this was at a demo that a few of us attended a couple of years ago now. And you can see that the textual content scrolls kind of in time with the presentation of the video. Or you can use the textual annotations to kind of navigate through the video because they're linked to specific points in time. So the idea itself isn't new, but the interoperability aspect and the fact that we can do this within Iiif is. And so here's an example of those annotations just in the manifest there, and we can see the difference between the temporal fragment at the top, where we're using time to target that, and the spatial annotation at the bottom, where we're using the XY width and height. And the important thing here is that the data model is identical because it's annotations throughout, and it's just the target that we're tweaking slightly to whether or not we're targeting the temporal aspect or the spatial aspect. And there's no reason, of course, why you can't target both at the same time, because you can do exactly that. Some captions, for example, work like that, and there's no reason to kind of split them out. But of course, once we've got a standard format, we can create new Iiif content. And so here's a demonstration of something that's also from Indiana University called the Timeliner, which is taking music performance in this case, and then kind of creating ranges upon it. So this is a tool that's actually used for teaching musicology. But of course, it operates entirely on kind of Iiif standard manifests. And I will be honest, I don't exactly know how this works, but it allows you to create kind of new ranges and provide metadata associated with them, and even create a hierarchy of ranges. Yeah, so exactly the same way as the tape example from the British Library here, we were able to create this kind of hierarchical structure and provide some metadata throughout. But of course, you can bring all of that together. So here is an example from Kanzaki Masahide again of synchronizing a performance. This is Glenn Gould playing the Goldberg variations, and have that presented alongside an image of the musical score. And then the highlighting annotation is targeting the temporal aspect. So as the music progresses, each musical bar is highlighted as it moves through. And this particular example, the annotation, the image is annotated along the whole duration of the performance, and the highlighting annotation is then just targeting the particular temporal time that it is relevant. But you can, of course, go much, much further with that. So here is an example from McGill University in Montreal, where the performance has been rendered in a music MEI, Music Encoding Initiative, and here it's kind of been engraved as an SVG, and each individual note is therefore annotated onto the appropriate time span on the canvas. And that means that we're able to provide linking between both the MEI note and the temporal time in the canvas, and vice versa. So as we scroll around the timeline, we can kind of jump around the musical score, or we can use the musical score to then provide navigation within the canvas itself. But obviously that's very time consuming and isn't something we can automate at the moment. But you can navigate using the measures and annotate them onto the specific regions of time, which is quite exciting and something that we couldn't do in Presentation API 2. And kind of looking ahead, there's some other work in this area. This has moved on since this time last year, but Brumfield Labs have been working with the University of Texas and the Hipsters project on this AudioAnnotate project to kind of create more native annotation tools for Iiif for audio and video content, which is very exciting. And Sarah's recently given a presentation on kind of where they've got so far with that, which is worth searching out. And unlike with images, so in the current Iiif, you are encouraged to use an image server because it's it gives a better user experience with people being able to deep zoom into high quality images. With audio and video, that's not actually necessary because HTML5 support in browsers is very good, and audio and video is supported mostly natively. So there's a few caveats around choosing the kind of correct audio codecs and so on, but in general, there's no need to do that. There's no need for the browser to download the kind of whole audio either. You can provide kind of server-side streaming audio and video like we do at the British Library, or you can simply, you know, leave a correctly encoded MP4 or something available, and the browser will request just the regions of it that it's interested in. So that kind of lowers the barrier to implementation as well, which is quite good. And I think hopefully, as we've demonstrated, there's a kind of a vibrant ecosystem of implementations that are available so far. And hopefully that was okay and managed to hit my 20 minutes pretty well. So if I just have a look at the chat here, and I've got a question. So how do we create a IIIF URL for the audio and video if you don't have the server? Yes, so one of the things that you can do is just reference it directly. So the target of the annotation on your canvas is just the URL to the whole file. So if you've got an MP3 or an MP4, whatever it happens to be, you can reference that directly. It's not like you have to provide the service block that you do when you're trying to reference an image server. So that's one of the other ways in which you can hopefully kind of reduce the kind of barrier to entry, because yes, image servers are very cool, and I've written one myself, but there's it's not exactly easy to get started with if you just want to make your content available. So I hope that answers that. Is there a good VTT to IIIF converter? Yes, I think there is. There's a few lines of Python that I think Rob Sanderson wrote in a workshop that we were at a few years ago, and I'm staring at Glenn's picture, not that that's really helping me remember that. But yeah, I think there is there's a Python library available for reading VTT files, and it's very simple then to just spit those back out in web annotation format. But that isn't to say that you necessarily need to do that. So VTT files, or web VTT files in particular, are supported by several of the players. I know the Europeana, I forget what it's called, but it's based on the same technology as the Universal Viewers implementation, will natively read and render those. And I think the Universal Viewer implementation still does that as well. So if you happen to have VTT available, there's no reason you can't provide those as an annotation, or as I forget which, well, if it should be an annotation or if it should be referenced as a C also, as like linked open data. But yes, not that, but again, not that you shouldn't include it as an open annotation if that's also your use case. And yes, I would agree with that. Yeah, so at the British Library, we've been kind of working on this for a long time, as Glenn mentioned. So kind of 2016 was when we really started working on this. We were supposed to have launched our all of our AV content available as IIIF some time ago, but for various reasons we've kind of met delays. So I think we're still kind of on track to be able to make that public in the autumn or in the fall, which would be exciting because we're using, well, we'll have something like 100,000 recordings automatically available, most of which should be open access, which is nice.
And if I can ask you a question, Andy. When we were initially discussing AV, we talked about having a video on YouTube and being able to embed that in a manifest. Is that possible?
That is a good question. I don't know. I don't see any reason why. Well, I mean, obviously that would be legal in the presentation API, but whether or not the implementations would follow it is probably the question. Yes, I don't know the answer to that one.
Okay. I will find out.
Yeah. But in terms of getting started, if you use the Avalon, or if you're involved in the Avalon project from the from Indiana University, then that comes with support for Iiif AV now, and their Avalon player is pretty good. The Universal Viewer, of course, is because the British Library have been involved in developing that as part of our work on this. We've made sure it's got a pretty robust AV implementation. Also, the examples from Kanzaki Masahide there are quite good, demonstrating the interoperability. And hopefully, we'll see some others come up as well. I don't actually know how Mirador 3 is doing in this regard, but it's probably better than Mirador 2. We'll find out.
Yeah, I think at the moment it's only image support. I don't think they support AV yet.
Right, so creating the manifest would require a lot of time if you want to break the time in sections of video frames. Well, yes. So one of the benefits of course is that you can be as specific or as generic as you like when you're describing your content. So for some content, it might make sense to not create ranges and to simply annotate the whole body of a recording onto a canvas. So for us, we already have this metadata because for rights clearance purposes, of course, we need to know kind of when we're cataloging this, kind of what this duration of audio is actually about, and who we may need to contact for rights purposes for clearance and so on. And so we just transform that directly into the Iiif manifest at the end. If you want to kind of create your own metadata and you don't have that up front, then the timeliner tool that was demonstrated from Indiana University might be helpful because there you can in fact just import an audio file and it will create a basic manifest for you, and you can create the kind of range hierarchy over the top of it at the various kind of time ranges. And hopefully we'll see the output from the Audio Annotate project from the University of Texas as well lead us to some pretty cool things. I mean, there's a lot of tools and technologies available kind of in cultural heritage for annotating audio at the moment. I'm thinking things like the OHMS project and things like that, which allow you to kind of create transcriptions for audio and video. And it would be really great to see those kind of broaden out to support Iiif so that we can start, just building on top of this common framework. That'd be very exciting.
Any final questions? Nope. Well, thank you, Andy. That was really great to see what's going on. I hope that was helpful for everyone. You're on the Slack channel for the group, so if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Andy there. And I'll see you next in a few hours for the annotations presentation. So thanks all.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.